So good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank first Professor Du for the invitation to present at this very interesting virtual forum series. My talk today will be around a recently completed project funded by NSF on enterprise security, and I'll talk about some high-level ideas towards solutions for breach resilient security analytics and credential management. This is the very dense slide that perhaps some of you may have seen in the webpage. I will only focus on the first and the third pillar of this type of work. And of course, it's going to be a very high level work, focusing mostly on the why and what I'm trying to solve with this research, and not so much on the how. So already we should be convinced that by the great presentations of my colleagues earlier, that the inconvenient truth for us is that if we consider enterprises, big organizations, and their security posture, things are not so great. Especially in the industrial world, there is the so-called term describing very sophisticated, very well-funded and well-targeted cyber attack campaigns. The term is advanced persistent threats, or APT for short. And more or less, the idea here is that these are so sophisticated attacks that will first gather some intelligence so that they know how to effectively penetrate any security mechanisms, so that they have a foothold in an enterprise, in a target enterprise. For instance, social engineering may be used. And then, as George also mentioned, there are really high-end, very recently discovered and so-called zero-day vulnerabilities that will be exploited in order to do some harm. And here, another important fact is that the progression of the attack is very low and slow and happens in a stealthy mode, so that typically we do not only can defend this type of attacks, but often we cannot even detect. We are lucky if we learn somehow after the fact that something happened. Typically, the attacks will target to exfiltrate some private data, or to tamper with the integrity of the system. Given this reality, the current state of affairs more or less is as follows. The best defenses against APT attacks in the security industry go along two major lines. Let's raise the fence. We cannot prevent attacks, that's the unfortunate reality, altogether, but let's at least do our best to make it harder for the attackers. For instance, we do our best so that we enforce stronger authentication, second factor authentication, or in general, very complicated access control policies, so that we manage who gets to see certain parts of the computer system, often through the use of cryptography and crypto tools and management of the cryptographic keys. Another very widely adopted and developed approach is to increase our capability of detecting attacks. Let's gather information along with the paradigm, see, analyze data, and hopefully try to catch, detect attacks and react hopefully in real time. Here is where we have a very interesting intersection between machine learning and data analytics, which has been developed very rapidly the last many years, with security. It's actually a canonical well-motivated real-world application of machine learning. The idea is that along with this protection of keys and access control in the system, install many police agents, some special software that is able to collect data like logs, activities, statistics, and this data is actually being collected in what is known in the industry as a SIM server. And there is some further data analysis. This is where the magic of machine learning and data science happens, so that at the high level and at the human level, the so-called Security Operating Center, or SOC for short, will be able to see in some nice colorful screens what's going on and hopefully detect some anomalies in the system. So what motivated this line of work is how good these practices are against these advanced persistent threats. And unfortunately, things here are not so great. Note that the A in APTs come from advanced. So these are really sophisticated attackers. And if they cannot win a game, they will try just to rig the game. To make sure that at the end of the day, they're the winners. So if there are special protections about, advanced key and credential management, passwords are used, or second factor authenticators, or you name it, all right, these are secret that are meant to be stored secretly. Let's attack the corresponding machines so that we steal this secret information. Or if we have this intelligence-based type of approach through the visibility in the system with logs and the SIM systems and everything, let's make sure that we target this part of the defense of the system so that we block or tamper with the data and actually, at the end, the analysis that the SIM system will perform. So overall, and by the way, there are real examples of these sophisticated attacks that they will really target these two major lines of defense. For them, for the intention of the attacker, these solutions just constitute another first target. Let's disarm any of these two or both of these defense lines, and then we do our job business as usual. So that's the reality, and that's why we were motivated in this project to offer better solutions. I often call this approach a not so natural, rational type of approach, because we install or we devise new defense mechanisms without protecting them, when the execution environment is actually a very difficult in real life threat model. So this is the conclusion, that all the existing state-of-the-art solutions will be themselves an easy target for advanced attackers, and the research was done towards this direction. Make sure that we advance the security of these defense lines so that they are themselves intrusion resilient. And these are three general approaches. The first one corresponds to a strategy to keep information and make sure that security is achieved at all levels of a complicated enterprise network. The second has to do with collaborative analytics. It is just better, strictly better, for enterprises to share data and make this machine learning magic analysis on more reliable and more representative data, rather than doing it individually. And finally, let's do key management the right way, such that the techniques themselves are resilient to any service compromise or any partial information being stolen. I note here that this is also exciting for me personally, because This is one example of the very fascinating and exciting intersection research area that is in the intersection of cryptography or security and machine learning and data science. I mentioned earlier that I often refer to this fact that sometimes our solutions are not so rational, with some very intuitive definition of being reasonable and being according to logic. And I have to say that I mostly work on applied cryptography, and sometimes, especially the academic view would be, let's try to do something like having a hammer on an existing solution and try to find applications. And it's interesting that in our community, we have actually the so-called real-world cryptography conference, a highly attended such conference. This demonstrates that actually there is some gap between perhaps academic solutions and real-world topics. So that's part of my philosophy. So I'll try to find solutions that in that sense are more natural, are more industry ready, so to speak. So for the next 5 minutes or so, I have prepared to provide, to describe at a very high level 3 such solutions. The first one comes with the name of Voltbox. It refers back to the case where we need to collect logs and alerts in a system that potentially is under attack. Remember, recall our police agent here. Say this is the laptop of the end machine of an employee in an enterprise. Some alerts are being collected and are being transferred for storage and analysis at the SIEM server. But this can be the direct attack target from an attacker. So in a first solution that we call a Voltbox, we have a system that provides a secure protected channel between all these agents and the alert collector, the SIEM server. And some nice features here that we have some guarantees against the suppression or tampering of this flow of information. What we do is, in order to protect, is in a stealth mode so that we don't leak intelligence to the attacker, because remember, the attackers will try to gather intelligence. There is some notion of self-protection that even if the host agent at the left is the victim of a direct attack, and even if the attacker is able to fully compromise this machine, still the corresponding alert that talks about this mere fact, the fact of the machine being a direct target, will survive our channel and will be collected by the SIEM server. And also importantly, we also have some solutions here for the secure storage of such log and alert data, such that they are protected against malicious or benign loss or corruption. This is work with my PhD student Nikos Triandopoulos, and this is really a very practical approach to solve this real problem for reliable alert collection. Now, let's assume that this is the case, and indeed you are an enterprise and you collect data and you run reliably this time the machine learning, or the magic as I call, in order to learn about what's going on and detect some attacks. Note that as is, the model will just allow different enterprises to collect data reliably in a SIEM server and then run their machine learning analysis so that they compute local models. So Stevens may apply this to learn about the infrastructure of Stevens, and then Rutgers, another institution, will do the same thing. There will not be communication or any type of information sharing. It turns out that this is not great. Big data analytics is so relevant and important in practice because it assumes variety of data. It's just better to learn over more data coming from different data sources. So ideally, we want to have a case where a joint model, machine learning model, is learned about the collected data across different enterprises organizations. The problem here is that probably you will not be inclined to share your details about what data you collected, what you have discovered, because this is by itself also a sensitive type of information. So in the second solution relates to a way to actually be able to perform this joint model creation, computation by two enterprises in a way that is private preserving, meaning that you learn something that you are comfortable learning, and everything else that is part of your private individual data set will remain private. And for instance, we can do cluster analysis among two parties. And this is quite interesting and important in practice because it finds many other applications. Think, for instance, how two hospitals would like to do joint cluster analysis without revealing the details of the individual medical records of their patients. This is joint work with my students, Saman, Ben, and Jan, and also with collaboration with collaborators at the Northeastern HK, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and Amazon. The last solution relates to key management. Recall that currently we have some policies and some crypto-based techniques to ensure that we have strong user authentication, second factor authentication, and rotation of secrets like password renewal and things like that. But at the end of the day, attackers, as I have mentioned earlier, will try to get access to these secrets. The last solution relates to a very flexible and efficient way to have at the defense side, machines in an enterprise communicate so that they change the target of the attacker. It becomes irrelevant or even useless for the attacker if the attacker, for instance, has compromised the machine and learned the secret state of this machine. This is the summary of the results. In the interest of time, I'll go a little bit at a very high level. The main idea here is that the secrets that are stored in a system change over time in very flexible schedules, such that even if parts of the system become under the control of the attacker, it's not the end of the game. So in other words, we have breach resilient key management schemes. This work is done with my PhD student, Dean Rodman, another very exciting line of work. So to conclude, hopefully I have convinced you that it's really vital to protect enterprises, and these are two major attack lines: key management and credential management and detection. This is a more general aim for me that personally, in terms of research, that I try, and I think sometimes it's really possible to combine rational solutions that are real life relevant and impactful. And finally, again, to iterate that this is really an exciting line of work. It's so interesting that security always becomes relevant. And recently, it's an important and incremental part of machine learning. Thank you very much, and I'm ready for questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Nikos. Very exciting and truly important research indeed. Any questions from the audience? Okay, let me try to ask hopefully intelligent enough question, right? And so it appears that network security will forever remain a challenge, right, in that regard. Now, the enterprises are increasingly migrating to cloud-based systems, right? So in that sense, how would the security posture be taken differently than by the enterprises if they are relying on basically other people to provide the needed services?
That's an excellent question. There are many different levels to provide a short answer about this. First, at the liability or level, it frees, so to speak, the enterprises to make sure that whatever regulatory policies exist or standards exist that they need to conform with, by employing in these cloud-based solutions, the liability goes to a third party. You pay your money and you have at least peace of mind with respect to that. So this is important. In fact, however, even big players, and cloud providers may be victims of an attack. So it's not a complete, addressing of the problem. Plus, sometimes the mere fact of outsourcing, perhaps your private customers' data, may be by itself a risky business, because you may not want to do that. But importantly, what I described, this solution concept of having a system that is actually remains breach resilient, even in the case where a few machines go down. This is very interesting, because actually now you can employ some of these machines to be designated cloud-based servers, virtual servers, cloud servers. In this case, you make the attacker's goal much, much harder, because now the attacker, in order to succeed and win the game, needs not only to compromise your own machines that are in your network, but also some machine in a cloud provider. So I would say that collectively, if we put these two technologies together, actually we have stronger results.
Well, that's great. Thanks very much for your authoritative answer. With that, let's conclude our forum today.